There is a moment in every life when a person realizes that their greatest enemy is not external. It is not a competitor, a circumstance, or an opponent standing across from them with a weapon drawn. The greatest enemy lives inside the mind, in the habits of thought that have been reinforced since childhood, in the automatic patterns of speech and reaction that drain power from the soul. This realization arrives differently for different people. For some, it comes as a sudden shock. For others, it is a slow burn, a quiet recognition that spreads like smoke through the corridors of consciousness until it becomes impossible to ignore. But whenever it arrives, it carries with it both a terrible truth and a hidden opportunity. The truth is that you have been weakening yourself. The opportunity is that you have also been given the power to stop. In ancient Japan, the samurai understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to articulate. They knew that weakness was not something that happened to a person. Weakness was something that a person constructed, brick by brick, through small choices repeated over time. The samurai called this understanding Bushido, the way of the warrior. But it was not merely a code of combat, it was a complete system of thought, a framework for constructing an identity so solid, so disciplined, that external circumstances lost their power to shake it. And at the heart of this system lay something that very few people today understand: the recognition that there are certain patterns of behavior, certain agreements we make with ourselves that must be eliminated entirely if strength is ever to take root. Today, we are going to explore 4 of these agreements, not as abstract philosophy, but as living instructions that you can apply to your life starting now. Chapter 1. The Awakening. There was a man named Michael who spent 15 years building a successful career. He had the job title, the salary, the credentials. By every external measure, he had won. And yet, he felt profoundly empty. He moved through his days like a performer on a stage, saying the right words, making the right gestures, but experiencing almost nothing of genuine meaning or authentic presence. He had mastered the art of appearing strong while feeling hollow inside. Michael was not weak in the traditional sense. He could endure long hours. He could navigate complex social situations. He could maintain discipline when external pressure demanded it. But there was a particular kind of weakness eating him alive from within, and he did not yet have a name for it. One evening, while reading about samurai philosophy, he encountered a passage from Miyamoto Musashi's Book of 5 Rings. Musashi wrote about the principle of shoji, the understanding that impermanence is not something to fear, but something to accept as fundamental truth. And in that acceptance, a strange freedom emerges. From this freedom, a person can act without the constant distraction of defending their ego, without the desperate need to appear strong to others. Michael realized in that moment that he had spent 15 years building a fortress of appearances, not a life. And fortresses, he understood, require constant maintenance. They require constant fear. They are, by definition, fragile. He made a decision that night to dismantle the structure he had built and to construct something true in its place. This decision led him to discover the 4 agreements that would eventually transform not just his outer life, but his inner world. Chapter 2. The first agreement that destroys weakness is this: you do not speak about your suffering to those who cannot help you bear it. This is not about suppression. This is not about pretending that pain does not exist. This is about understanding the difference between sharing and venting, between seeking wisdom and seeking sympathy. The samurai understood that every time you speak about your wound to someone incapable of healing it, you are essentially rehearsing the wound. You are strengthening its grip on your consciousness. You are making it real in a new way each time you articulate it. In Zen Buddhism, there is a concept called harage, which translates to belly art. It refers to communication that happens beneath the surface, in silence and presence rather than in words. The Zen masters understood that the mouth can be a liability. The untrained mouth speaks suffering into existence, amplifies grievance, and transforms temporary difficulty into a permanent identity. A person who says, "I am struggling," begins in that moment to become someone who is struggling. They take on the identity encoded in their own speech. This principle horrifies modern culture, which celebrates the sharing of everything. Social media has created an entire economy around the broadcasting of suffering. But the samurai knew something different. They knew that certain things should be kept silent until they have been transformed into wisdom. Only then is it appropriate to speak about them. Michael discovered this when he began to recognize how much of his daily conversation was dedicated to describing his frustrations, his setbacks, his anxieties. He spoke to his friends about his worries. He complained to his colleagues about his limitations. He narrated his failures to anyone who would listen. And with each telling, the problems seemed to grow larger, more real, more inescapable. The first agreement he made with himself was absolute. He would speak about his suffering only to those who were actively helping him overcome it. His therapist, his mentor, a single close friend who had proven capable of wisdom. Everyone else would receive only the truth of his present state, stripped of dramatization and complaint, not because he was denying his experience, but because he understood that there is a sacred difference between acknowledgement and rehearsal. What happened was remarkable. Within weeks, his suffering began to shrink, not because it disappeared, but because he was no longer feeding it with constant verbalization. The mental energy that had been devoted to describing his problems became available for solving them. And something else shifted as well. People began to relate to him differently. They sensed a kind of clarity in him, a refusal to collapse into victimhood. They started to approach him differently, with more respect, with more genuine attention. He had become, through silence, more trustworthy. The first agreement, silence on suffering, had transformed him. It had revealed that much of his weakness was not inherent. It was constructed through habit, through the constant rehearsal of his own limitations. And when he stopped speaking them, they began to dissolve. Chapter 3. The Second Agreement. Elimination of Complaint. The second agreement moves deeper into the territory of self-mastery. It is this: you eliminate complaint from your vocabulary and from your thought patterns entirely. This is different from the first agreement. Silence on suffering is about restraint in speech toward others. This second agreement is about the internal conversation you have with yourself. It is about the constant low-level narration of dissatisfaction that most people live inside of continuously without even noticing it is there. The samurai recognized that complaint is a form of mental weakness that metastasizes. It begins as a single negative thought about a circumstance, but that thought, left unchecked, becomes a belief. That belief becomes an identity, and that identity becomes a prison. There is a teaching from Zen Buddhism called Mushin, which means no mind. It refers to a state of consciousness that is free from the constant chatter of judgment, evaluation, and complaint. In this state, a person can see reality as it actually is, without the filter of their preferences, their resentments, their desires for things to be different than they are. The samurai trained for years to access this state of mind, not as a luxury, but as a necessity for survival in combat. They understood that the moment a warrior begins to mentally complain about an opponent's strength, or the unfairness of a situation, or the difficulty of what they face, they have already lost. The enemy has moved from the external battlefield into the internal one. Michael had been a chronic complainer. He complained about the weather, he complained about traffic, he complained about the decisions his company made. He complained about his past. Most of these complaints happened in the privacy of his own mind, in the running commentary that narrated his day. He had never thought of this internal monologue as weakness, but when he began to observe it carefully, he realized something disturbing. Nearly 80% of his internal dialogue was critical. It was focused on what was wrong, what was missing, what should be different. He was essentially spending most of his conscious life in a state of disagreement with reality. The second agreement he made was absolute. He would observe and eliminate every complaint, external and internal, for a period of 30 days. This was far more difficult than silence on suffering. Complaint had become so automatic that it was nearly invisible. He would catch himself mid-sentence, mid-thought, in the act of complaining and have to consciously redirect. He did not suppress the complaint or pretend it did not exist. He simply observed it and chose not to voice it, not even internally. He would notice the impulse to mentally complain about something that had gone wrong, acknowledge it, and then deliberately shift his attention to what could be done about it, or, if nothing could be done, to what else was present and true in that moment. There was traffic on his commute. True. He could not change it. True. But there was also music, or silence, or the opportunity to observe his own mind. These things were also true. By deliberately training his attention away from complaint and toward what was actually present and possible, he began to experience reality in a completely different way. The second agreement, elimination of complaint, had broken a pattern that had been reinforcing weakness for decades. He was no longer building a prison of dissatisfaction. He was building the capacity to see and respond to what actually existed.
Chapter 4. The third agreement. Validation from within. The third agreement takes the work even deeper into the territory of self-mastery. It is this: you cease seeking external validation, and you learn to recognize truth and worth through your own direct observation and internal knowing. This is perhaps the most challenging of the four agreements, because modern culture has constructed an entire apparatus designed to make people doubt their own inner compass and seek external approval instead. From childhood, we are told that our worth is determined by grades, by praise, by the recognition of authorities and peers. We internalize the message that our own judgment cannot be trusted, that we need external permission to believe in ourselves. The samurai had a different understanding. They learned through years of training under a sensei or master teacher to develop an internal standard of excellence that was not dependent on external recognition. There is a concept in Japanese martial arts called shuhari. It describes the progression of learning. First, you follow the form precisely, without deviation. You do exactly what your teacher does. Then you begin to break from the form, to understand the principles beneath it and to apply them in new contexts. Finally, you transcend the form entirely and move through the world with complete mastery and freedom. But this progression only becomes possible when a student develops the internal capacity to recognize excellence for themselves. The teacher can point the way, but the student must eventually learn to trust their own perception of quality and truth. In modern life, this capacity for internal validation has atrophied in almost everyone. We post something online and wait for likes. We make a decision and then seek reassurance from others. We accomplish something and feel as though it does not matter unless someone else recognizes it. We fail at something and interpret it as evidence of our fundamental unworthiness, rather than simply observing it as feedback. We have outsourced our sense of value to an external system that is fundamentally designed to manipulate us. Michael recognized this clearly when he began to examine his own patterns. He realized that he had built his entire career around seeking approval from people he did not actually respect. He had taken advice from people who had demonstrated no real success in the areas he was asking them about. He had doubted his own judgment consistently, even in situations where he later proved to be right. The third agreement he made was this: he would develop an internal standard of excellence, and he would trust it. This meant several things in practice. First, it meant identifying the people in his life who had actually achieved things he respected and listening primarily to them. Second, it meant beginning to keep a private record of his own insights and observations, trusting that if something felt true to him, it was worth taking seriously until proven otherwise. Third, and most importantly, it meant beginning to do things for their own sake, not for the recognition they might bring. He started a daily practice of writing that nobody else would ever read. He engaged in physical training not to achieve a specific appearance, but because he valued the discipline and the presence it created in his body. He read books that nobody was recommending, simply because they interested him. He made decisions based on what felt true to him rather than what would be most likely to earn approval. And something extraordinary happened. As he stopped seeking external validation, his confidence began to grow. Not in the fragile way that comes from receiving compliments, but in the solid way that comes from repeatedly proving to yourself that you can trust your own perception and judgment. The third agreement, validation from within, had severed the invisible chains that had kept him dependent on systems designed to extract his energy and attention. He was no longer a satellite orbiting other people's opinions. He had become a center of gravity himself.
Chapter 5. The fourth and final agreement is this: everything you say, you do, or you do not say it. There is no middle ground. This agreement strikes at the heart of a particular kind of weakness that is so normalized in modern culture that it is almost invisible. It is the weakness of saying one thing and doing another. It is the weakness of making promises you do not keep, to others and to yourself. It is the weakness of allowing a gap to exist between your word and your action. The samurai understood that this gap was corrosive to the soul. Every time you say something and do not follow through, you are training your mind to distrust itself. You are weakening your own sense of integrity. You are building a relationship with yourself that is fundamentally adversarial. Over time, your word becomes meaningless, even to you. In the Bushido Code, there was an absolute principle about speech and commitment. A samurai's word was his bond. This was not merely a social convention. It was understood as essential to the warrior's identity and power. A samurai who said something and did not do it was not just dishonest. He had fundamentally compromised himself. He had created an internal division, a part of him at war with another part of him. This internal conflict was understood to be far more dangerous than any external enemy, because it could never be defeated while remaining unacknowledged. The solution was absolute. Everything you say, you must do. This meant becoming extremely careful about what you said. You did not make casual promises. You did not exaggerate your intentions. You did not speak commitments lightly. You spoke very little, and what you spoke, you honored completely. Michael's life had been full of broken agreements, small ones mostly. He told people he would call them and did not. He told himself he would go to the gym and stayed home instead. He made plans and changed them without serious reason. He told friends he was fine when he was struggling. He told himself he would start his creative project and put it off for months. Each broken agreement was small, but collectively they had constructed a profound distrust of himself. He had become someone he could not count on. The fourth agreement he made was absolute. He would say nothing he was not fully committed to doing, and he would do everything he said. This meant a dramatic reduction in his speech. He stopped making casual plans. He stopped promising things he was not certain about. He told people less, but what he told them was true and solid. He made fewer commitments to himself, but he honored every single one. What happened was transformative. Within months, his relationship with himself had fundamentally shifted. When he said he would do something, he did it. And because he did what he said, he began to trust himself again. His word became real, both to himself and to others. People began to understand that when Michael said something, it meant something. His commitments carried weight. His promises were not casual utterances, but declarations of intent backed by action. He began to experience a coherence in his being that he had never known before. His internal world and his external world were no longer at war, they were aligned. The fourth agreement, actions aligned with word, had unified him. He had become whole.
Chapter 6. The Transformation. By the time Michael had been living these 4 agreements for 6 months, something remarkable had occurred. He had not become a different person, rather he had become more fully himself. The person he was underneath all the performance, all the weakness, all the constructed patterns of self-sabotage had finally been given room to emerge. He was quieter than before, but his silence carried more power. He was less concerned with what others thought, but paradoxically, people respected him more. He was more disciplined, but that discipline had not made him rigid. Instead, it had made him free. He could move through the world with a kind of presence and authenticity that attracted the right people and situations to him naturally. The 4 agreements had worked not because they were complicated, but because they were absolute. They required no willpower in the traditional sense. They required only a clear decision and consistent application. Silence on suffering, elimination of complaint, validation from within, actions aligned with word. These were not suggestions, these were structural supports for the development of genuine strength. The samurai understood that weakness was not something that happened to you, it was something that you constructed through repeated small choices. And strength, likewise, was not something you inherited or were granted, it was something you built deliberately through the consistent application of principles that had been tested across centuries. Michael's life had changed in practical ways as well. His career had shifted. The constant anxiety he felt had diminished dramatically. His relationships had deepened because he was finally present in them. He had started a creative project that mattered to him. But the most significant change was internal. He had developed a relationship with himself that was based on trust. That trust was not fragile. It was not dependent on external circumstances or on whether he was succeeding or failing at any particular thing. It was rooted in the simple, solid reality that when he said something, it was true. That his suffering did not define him. That his worth did not require external permission. That he could observe reality clearly without the constant filter of complaint. That he was, in the deepest sense, reliable. This is what the ancient samurai meant when they spoke of strength. Not the absence of difficulty or pain or challenge, but the capacity to face these things without fragmenting, without constructing false narratives about them, without seeking escape through complaint or external validation. Strength was wholeness, and wholeness came from the patient, disciplined alignment of word with action, of inner conviction with outer behavior, of what you said to yourself with what you actually did.
Chapter 7. The Application. Now, you may be thinking about your own life, and you may be sensing the places where these agreements have been violated. You may be aware of the ways you have weakened yourself through silence withheld incorrectly, through constant complaint, through the hunger for external validation, through words disconnected from action. This awareness is the first stage. It is not comfortable, but it is essential. You cannot change what you do not see. The second stage is decision. You must decide with genuine commitment that you are willing to live differently. This decision cannot be half-hearted. It cannot be tentative. It must be absolute. You are choosing, right now, to become someone who can be trusted, first by yourself and then by others. The application of these agreements is straightforward, though not easy. You begin, as Michael did, with a clear understanding of each one. The first agreement is about speech. From this moment forward, you speak about your suffering only to those who are actively helping you overcome it. Everyone else receives the truth of your present state, without dramatization. If someone asks how you are, and the honest answer is that you are struggling, you can say that, but you do not elaborate. You do not rehearse the suffering. You do not seek sympathy. You simply state the truth and move forward. This dramatically reduces the amount you speak, which is good. Most of us speak far too much anyway. The second agreement is about internal dialogue. You begin to observe the constant stream of complaint that runs through your mind. You notice it without judgment, and you deliberately, consciously choose to stop it, not by suppression, but by redirection. When you notice the impulse to complain internally about something, you acknowledge it, and then you ask yourself what could be done about the situation. If something can be done, you focus on that. If nothing can be done, you focus on what is still present and true. You practice this until the habit of complaint begins to weaken. This takes time, perhaps weeks or months, but the capacity is always there. You need only activate it. The third agreement requires that you identify your internal standard. What do you actually believe is good? What do you actually think is true? Not what have you been told is good or true, but what you yourself perceive to be good and true when you think clearly. You begin to trust this perception. You make small decisions based on it. You read books you genuinely want to read, not books you think you should read. You pursue work that aligns with your actual values, not work that will impress others. You spend time with people who genuinely matter to you, not people whose approval you are seeking. You build a relationship with your own judgment, and that relationship becomes the foundation of your confidence. The fourth agreement is perhaps the easiest to implement, though it requires the most discipline. You simply become scrupulous about your word. You do not say things you do not mean. You do not make commitments you do not fully intend to honor. You say less, but what you say carries weight. You make fewer promises, but you keep every one. You commit to fewer things, but you follow through completely. This simple discipline, maintained consistently, will transform your relationship with yourself more profoundly than any other practice.
Chapter 8. The Deeper Teaching. There is something important that must be understood about these four agreements. They are not separate. They are aspects of a single, unified principle. That principle is integrity. Integrity means wholeness. It means that your internal world and your external world are not at war. It means that you are not divided against yourself. The samurai understood that divided people are weak. A person with a split consciousness, whose word contradicts their action, whose speech contradicts their belief, whose outer presentation contradicts their inner reality, that person is fragile. They can be manipulated. They can be defeated by their own internal contradictions. Conversely, a person who is whole, whose word and action are unified, whose speech reflects reality, whose inner conviction and outer behavior are aligned, that person has access to a power that cannot be taken from them. The samurai called this mushin, or no mind, but it would be more accurate to call it integrated mind, a mind that is not at war with itself, a consciousness that is not divided. This integration does not happen accidentally. It happens through the patient, deliberate application of principles like the ones we have discussed. It happens through the willingness to eliminate the patterns that have been fragmenting you. There is also something important to understand about suffering. The samurai did not deny suffering. They faced it directly, but they refused to build an identity around it. They refused to allow suffering to become their story. There is a concept in Zen Buddhism called gamen, which means to endure with patience and without complaint. It does not mean to deny pain. It means to feel the pain, to understand it, to learn from it, and to refuse to be broken by it. The application of the first three agreements is essentially training in gamen. You are learning to feel your suffering, to observe it clearly, to work with it intelligently without allowing it to become the central narrative of your life. And finally, there is something important to understand about action. The samurai lived in a world where action had immediate consequences. If a warrior made a commitment and did not follow through, people died. If he became careless with his word, his life was forfeit. This created a sacred relationship with speech and action. In the modern world, the consequences are usually less dramatic, but they are no less real. Every time you say something and do not do it, you are training your mind that your word is unreliable. Every time you make a commitment and break it, you are weakening yourself at the deepest level. But every time you say something and honor it, every time you make a commitment and follow through, you are building something unshakable inside yourself. You are constructing a character that can be trusted. This trust, once developed, becomes the foundation for everything else.
Chapter 9. the beyond. Now, you may wonder if there's a fifth agreement, a sixth, a seventh, and the answer is both yes and no. Yes, in the sense that once you have mastered these four, you will naturally discover other principles that call to you. But no, in the sense that if you truly master these four, if you live them not as abstract ideals, but as lived reality, they will transform your life so completely that you will find yourself naturally moving toward greater and greater levels of integrity and wholeness. The four agreements are not the destination. They are the foundation. They are the bedrock upon which genuine strength is built. There is a teaching from the samurai tradition about levels of mastery. The lowest level is conscious incompetence. You do not know what you do not know. The second level is conscious competence. You know what you are trying to do, and you have to think about it constantly to do it. The third level is unconscious competence. You have integrated the principles so deeply that you live them without having to think about them. And the fourth level is a return to conscious incompetence, but at a higher spiral. You have gone so deep into the practice that you have moved beyond it. You are once again innocent, but an innocence that can only be achieved by passing through total mastery. These four agreements will move you over time through these levels. You will begin by consciously practicing them. You will catch yourself mid-complaint and consciously redirect. You will consciously weigh your words before you speak them. You will consciously choose not to seek external validation. Over time, these conscious practices will become automatic. Your default will shift. You will find that complaint no longer even arises in your mind, that you naturally speak less and more truthfully, that you have developed such a strong internal reference point that external validation becomes almost irrelevant. Chapter 10. Conclusion. The ancient samurai left us a legacy that has little to do with swords or combat. They left us a legacy of how to be fully human, how to be whole, how to construct a self that is coherent, reliable, and powerful. In a modern world that is fragmenting us in every direction, that is constantly telling us that our worth is determined by external factors, that is encouraging us to constantly speak, constantly perform, constantly seek approval, this legacy becomes more valuable than ever. The four agreements are your access point to this legacy. They are simple. They are not easy, but they are simple. Silence on suffering, elimination of complaint, validation from within, actions aligned with word. These are not commands imposed on you from outside. These are invitations to become whole, to become someone who can be trusted, to become someone whose inner world and outer world are no longer at war. Michael, in our story, discovered what every person who is truly engaged with these agreements discovers, that weakness is not something that happens to you, it is something you construct. And once you understand that construction, you can choose to dismantle it. You can choose, starting today, to begin the work of integration, to begin the practice of speaking the truth and only the truth, to begin the discipline of keeping your word to others and to yourself, to begin the cultivation of an internal standard that does not depend on external approval, to begin the elimination of the constant complaint that clouds your perception. You do not need to do all of this at once. You do not need to be perfect. You need only to begin. Choose one of the four agreements. Practice it. When you have integrated it deeply enough that it no longer requires conscious effort, add the second, then the third, then the fourth. Over time, you will transform, not into a different person, but into a more complete version of yourself. The person you were always capable of being, before the world taught you to fragment and perform and seek approval from those who do not know you. This is the teaching of the ancient samurai. This is the way of wholeness, and it is available to you now.